I was sipping my iced tea under the giant oak tree in my backyard when Karen's voice sliced through the Sunday afternoon calm like a lawnmower on steroids. You've got exactly 30 seconds to get off this property, or I'm calling the HOA patrol. And trust me, they don't mess around, she barked, waving her phone like it was a loaded weapon. I froze mid-sip, the condensation dripping down my glass, and thought, is this woman for real? Hey, if you've ever dealt with an overzealous HOA Karen, drop a comment below. I'm James, by the way, a federal consultant living in a quiet little cul-de-sac in Maple Grove, a cozy suburb just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. My house on 42 Pinewood Lane is my sanctuary, fully fenced, fully deeded, and built in 2008, long before the Maple Grove HOA even existed. I'm not even a member of their little club, but that didn't stop Karen. Oh no, she crowned herself the queen of this neighborhood, and apparently, I was her new target. It all started on a perfect June afternoon, the kind where the sun is just warm enough to make you feel alive, and the breeze carries the smell of fresh-cut grass. I'd grabbed a book, The Great Gatsby, if you're curious, and parked myself in my favorite Adirondack chair under the oak tree I planted back in 2010. My backyard is my pride and joy, a little slice of paradise with a koi pond, a veggie garden, and a hammock I've been meaning to use for years. I was 2 chapters in, my iced tea sweating beside me, when I heard the stomping. You know that kind of stomping, like someone's trying to make a point with every step? That was Karen. She appeared at the fence line like a pastel-colored storm cloud, decked out in a baby blue tracksuit, oversized sunglasses perched on her platinum blonde pixie cut, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was the Constitution. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice so shrill I swear the squirrels in my tree froze. "You're not supposed to be here." I looked around, half expecting to see someone else. She was yelling confident. "This is HOA property, and you're not a member. I've checked the records." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Ma'am," I said, setting my book down, "I live here. This is my backyard." She puffed up like a peacock, her sunglasses glinting in the sun. "Oh, really? Because I've seen men in suits coming and going from this house, and I know for a fact it belongs to some federal bigwig. You're probably a squatter, or worse, one of those fake security guys." I raised an eyebrow, trying not to choke on my iced tea. A squatter? In my own backyard? This woman was unhinged. "Now, here's the thing. I am a federal consultant. I work on sensitive projects for the government, nothing flashy, just a lot of boring briefings and paperwork. But because of the nature of my job, I've got a rotating security detail. Think of it like being a low-key diplomat. I don't need protection from danger, but I do need to be watched. It's not something I advertise. I mean, I'm not walking around Maple Grove with a sign that says, 'Hey, I've got Secret Service on speed dial.'" But Karen had clearly been spying on me, and she'd jumped to all the wrong conclusions. She whipped out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "I'm calling the neighborhood patrol right now," she hissed. "They'll deal with you." I blinked. "Is that even a real thing?" She scowled, her face turning a shade of red that clashed horribly with her tracksuit. "Yes, and they have more authority than you'll ever have, squatter." I was about to respond when I heard the unmistakable whine of a golf cart engine. Oh, great. Here comes the cavalry. A guy I later learned was named Brad rolled up in a golf cart that looked like it had seen better days. He was shirtless, tanned to a crisp, wearing wraparound sunglasses and cargo shorts, and holding, get this, a megaphone. "Sir," he bellowed through the megaphone, even though he was barely 10 feet away, "you are trespassing on HOA-monitored property. Vacate immediately." I looked from Brad to Karen, then back to Brad, waiting for the punchline. Surely this was a prank, right? I mean, who shows up to a backyard with a megaphone over a non-existent HOA violation? But Karen wasn't laughing. She'd started filming me with her phone, narrating like she was on a true crime podcast. "Here we have the suspect, refusing to comply with HOA regulations," she said, zooming in on my face. Brad joined in, pulling out his own phone to record, and I noticed curtains twitching in the neighbors' windows. People were watching, like this was the Maple Grove reality TV event of the year. I sighed, reached into my back pocket, and pulled out my phone. Not to record. No, I needed backup. I dialed Agent Carter, my lead security guy. "Carter," I said quietly, "you might want to drive around back. We've got a situation." He didn't hesitate. "Understood, sir." he replied, his voice calm as ever. I hung up and looked at Karen, who was now screaming about how I was pretending to be a secret agent and a threat to the neighborhood. Brad, still holding his megaphone, shouted, "We've got a non-compliant individual." I bit my lip to keep from laughing. This was about to get interesting. Just as Karen's voice hit a pitch that could shatter glass, I heard the low rumble of an engine pulling into my driveway. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows rolled to a stop, and two men in crisp suits stepped out. Agent Carter and Agent Hayes, my security detail. Carter, a tall guy with a jawline sharper than my kitchen knives, adjusted his sunglasses and nodded at me. "Sir," he said, his voice calm but firm, "is everything okay?" I smirked, gesturing toward Karen, who was still filming like she'd just caught me robbing a bank. "Karen here seems to think I don't live in my own house," I said, taking a sip of my iced tea for dramatic effect. Karen's jaw dropped so fast I thought it might hit the grass. She blinked, her phone shaking in her hand, and stammered, "Are you people? This is HOA property. You can't just—" Carter cut her off, stepping forward with the kind of quiet authority that makes you feel like you're about to be grounded for life. "Ma'am," he said, holding up his badge, "this is a federally protected residence. You're interfering with a secure location. Step back now." Brad, who'd been holding his megaphone like a security blanket, dropped it with a clatter and started backing toward his golf cart, his tan face paling faster than a summer sunset. I couldn't help but feel a little smug as I watched Karen's world implode. She'd been so sure of herself, marching up to my fence like she owned the whole cul-de-sac, and now here she was, face to face with two Secret Service agents who weren't about to let her HOA clipboard scare them. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. Oh no, she doubled down harder than a kid refusing to eat broccoli. "This is fake," she shrieked, swatting at Carter's badge like it was a fly buzzing around her head. "I could buy that badge at a thrift store. You're all actors." I saw a TikTok about this kind of scam. Across the street, I noticed my neighbor Emily peeking through her blinds, her phone pressed to her ear. She was probably calling her husband, Mark, who worked at the local hardware store and was always up for some neighborhood gossip. I could almost hear her now. "Mark, you won't believe this. Karen's losing it at James's place, and there are guys in suits everywhere." Meanwhile, Karen was still ranting, her voice echoing through Maple Grove like a foghorn. "I know my rights," she yelled, jabbing a finger at Carter. "You can't intimidate me. I'm the vice president of the HOA." Carter didn't even flinch. He tapped his earpiece and spoke in a low voice. "HQ, we have a civilian refusing to comply with verbal commands. Requesting documentation team." Karen's eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought she might actually faint. "Documentation team?" she sputtered. "What does that even mean?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, and muttered under my breath, "You're about to find out, Karen." Sure enough, a second black SUV pulled up, this one with a subtle Homeland Security logo on the door. Brad, who'd been inching toward his golf cart, tripped over his own feet and landed flat on his back, staring up at the sky like he'd just seen a UFO. The new agents stepped out, one of them carrying a tablet, the other a camera. They started taking photos of the scene, my fence, the oak tree, Karen's clipboard, even Brad's golf cart. Karen's face went from red to purple, and she started pacing like a caged animal. "This is a setup," she screamed, pointing at me. "He's not a federal whatever. He's a fraud. I've seen the men in suits, but that doesn't prove anything. You're all in on it." I couldn't hold back anymore. I laughed, loud enough for her to hear. "Karen," I said, shaking my head, "you really need to stop watching those conspiracy videos." At the same time, I noticed more neighbors gathering on their porches. Old Mr. Thompson, who'd lived on Pinewood Lane since the 80s, was sipping coffee and shaking his head, while Sarah, a single mom from 2 houses down, was filming the whole thing on her phone. I could already imagine the Maple Grove Facebook group lighting up with posts. "Karen versus the feds. Who's got the popcorn?" Back in my yard, Agent Hayes approached Karen, his voice as smooth as a radio host's. "Ma'am," he said, "this property is under federal advisement status. It's not part of the HOA. You're trespassing, and if you don't leave now, we'll have to escalate this." Karen froze, her phone still recording, and for a moment, I thought she might actually listen. But then she spun around, marched back to the fence, and jabbed her finger at me again. "You think this is over?" she hissed. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight, and we're voting you out of this neighborhood. You'll see. This isn't your land, and it never will be." She stormed off, her tracksuit swishing with every step, while Brad scrambled to his feet and hopped into his golf cart, peeling out like he was in a high-speed chase. I looked at Carter, who was still standing there, unfazed. "She's not going to stop, is she?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He gave me a dry smile. "Not until she learns the hard way, sir." I sighed, picking up my book again, but I couldn't focus. Karen's parting words echoed in my head, voting me out of my own neighborhood? This woman was delusional, but she was also relentless. I had a feeling this was only the beginning of her crusade, and I wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or entertained. One thing was certain, Maple Grove was about to get a lot more interesting. I thought I'd seen the last of Karen for at least a few hours after she stormed off, but I underestimated her stubbornness. By 6 p.m., my backyard was quiet again. Well, almost. The faint sound of a loudspeaker crackled through the air, and I knew trouble was brewing. I stepped onto my porch, still holding my now warm iced tea, and saw a sight that made my jaw drop. Karen had set up a full-on HOA rebellion headquarters in her front yard across the street at 45 Pinewood Lane. A folding table sat under a white canopy tent, piled high with donuts, a stack of neon yellow flyers, and a megaphone, yes, the same one Brad had dropped earlier. A hand-painted sign on the tent read, "Protect Maple Grove from federal invaders," in angry red letters. I couldn't believe it. This woman had turned my Sunday afternoon drama into a neighborhood spectacle, and she wasn't slowing down. I grabbed my binoculars, don't judge. I'm a federal consultant, not a spy, and watched as Karen stood on a plastic chair, waving her clipboard like a battle flag. "We will not let this neighborhood be taken over by fake feds," she shouted through the loudspeaker, her voice bouncing off every house on the block. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, some curious, some munching on her donuts, and others just there for the entertainment. I spotted Emily and Mark, who'd clearly rushed home from the hardware store to catch the show, whispering to each other and pointing at Karen's setup. Meanwhile, back in my yard, Agent Carter was on his phone, coordinating with HQ. "She's escalating," he said, glancing across the street. "We might need to monitor this more closely." I nodded, still peering through my binoculars. Karen was handing out her flyers, which I could see had a grainy photo of my house with red arrows pointing to my garden shed and satellite dish. One arrow was labeled Suspicious Activity Hub, and another circled my shed with the words Possible Signal Tower. I snorted. "What's next, Karen?" accusing my koi pond of being a secret communication device. At the same time, Karen's emergency HOA meeting was in full swing. She'd roped in a few of her loyalists, Mrs. Davis, a retired schoolteacher who always nodded at everything Karen said, and Tom, a guy who owned a landscaping business and probably just wanted the free donuts. Karen climbed back onto her chair, her tracksuit practically glowing in the evening sun, and announced, "All in favor of evicting the intruder at 42 Pinewood Lane, raise your hands." Out of the 15 or so people in her yard, only 3 hands went up, Mrs. Davis, Tom, and a confused-looking teenager who'd wandered over with his skateboard. Karen's face twisted in frustration, but she declared, "Motion passed. We'll draft an official HOA order tomorrow." I couldn't hold back my laughter anymore. She thinks she can vote me out of my own house? I said to Carter, who was now standing beside me, his arms crossed. He shook his head, a rare smirk tugging at his lips. "She's got no idea what she's up against, sir." He pulled out a tablet and showed me drone footage from earlier that day, Karen sneaking up to my fence, filming my property, and even trying to peek into my windows. "She's been at this for weeks," Carter said. "This isn't her first rodeo." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a one-off tantrum. Karen had been stalking me. Across the street, the meeting was spiraling into chaos. Brad, who'd shown up late after his golf cart escape, tried to play peacemaker. "Maybe we should, check with the county records before we do anything drastic," he suggested, holding up a crumpled HOA manual. Karen snatched it from his hands and threw it on the ground. "We don't need records," she snapped. "This is our neighborhood, and we don't take orders from fake federal agents pretending to be neighbors." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others backing away like they just realized they were in over their heads. Back at my place, I was starting to feel a mix of amusement and annoyance. I'd spent years keeping a low profile in Maple Grove, paying my taxes, mowing my lawn, even bringing cookies to the block party last summer. And now, here was Karen, turning my quiet life into a circus because she couldn't handle the fact that I wasn't part of her HOA kingdom. I turned to Carter. "What's the play here?" I asked. He tapped his earpiece, listening to a response from HQ. "We let her dig her own grave," he said simply. "She's already crossed a line by interfering with a federally protected property. We've got the footage. It's just a matter of time." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Karen's meeting wrapped up with her promising to take this to the highest levels of HOA law. She stomped back into her house, leaving her tent and flyers behind, while the neighbors dispersed, whispering to each other. I could feel the tension in the air. Maple Grove was on edge, and Karen's little rebellion had only just begun. I sat back in my chair, staring at the stars starting to peek through the sky, and wondered what she'd try next. One thing was for sure. I wasn't going anywhere, no matter how many flyers she printed or how loud she screamed. This was my home, and I'd fought too hard to let some clipboard-wielding Karen take it away from me. By Monday morning, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally given up. I was wrong. I woke up to the sound of a news van's antenna clanking as it parked right in front of her house at 45 Pinewood Lane. I rubbed my eyes, grabbed my coffee, and stepped onto my porch to see what fresh chaos she'd cooked up. Under her white canopy tent, still standing from last night's HOA fiasco, Karen had transformed her front yard into what she called a community truth zone. New signs were propped up everywhere. "Protect our rights from fake feds," and "This neighborhood is being watched," in bold, angry Sharpie. She'd even taped blurry photos of my security cameras and mailbox to a poster board, with red arrows labeled, "Unknown frequencies." I nearly spit out my coffee. Unknown frequencies? From my mailbox? Across the street, Karen was in her element, dabbing her forehead with a handkerchief like she was about to deliver a speech at the United Nations. A young reporter from Channel 9 News, a guy named Ethan with a tired look in his eyes, was setting up a camera while Karen narrated her ordeal. "I've been targeted by fake federal agents," she declared, pointing across the street at my house. "They're trying to silence me, but I won't let them take our neighborhood." Ethan nodded politely, but I could tell he'd rather be covering a local bake sale than this suburban conspiracy meltdown. Meanwhile, I wasn't the only one watching. Agent Carter stood beside me on the porch, his arms crossed, his sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. "She's bringing in the media now," he said, his voice a mix of amusement and exasperation. "This is escalating faster than we expected." I took a sip of my coffee, trying to stay calm, but my stomach churned. I'd spent years keeping my life in Maple Grove drama-free. I'm the guy who brings extra burgers to the block party, not the guy who ends up on the evening news. But Karen was determined to drag me into her spotlight, whether I liked it or not. Back at Karen's truth zone, she'd roped Ethan into walking right up to my fence line. "See this," she said, pointing at my garden gnome like it was evidence in a murder trial. "This is where they're hiding their surveillance equipment. And those solar panels? They're intercepting our Wi-Fi." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but he let her ramble while his cameraman filmed. I could hear the neighbors whispering from their yards. Sarah, the single mom, was on her phone, probably live-streaming to the Maple Grove Facebook group, while Mr. Thompson shook his head and muttered, "This woman's lost it." I turned to Carter. "She's filming my property again," I said, my voice tight. "Can she do that?" He shook his head, already moving toward the edge of my yard. "Not on federal land, she can't." He walked across the street with the kind of calm that makes you nervous, Agent Hayes trailing behind him. By the time they reached Karen, she was in mid-sentence, accusing my koi pond of being a secret communication hub. Carter held up his badge again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, "you're trespassing on federally protected property. Step back, or you'll be detained." Karen's face twisted into a scowl, but Ethan, the reporter, took one look at Carter's badge and immediately backed off. "We'll stay on public land," he stammered, motioning for his cameraman to pack up. "I don't want any legal trouble." Karen, of course, wasn't having it. "Don't you want the real story?" she barked, grabbing Ethan's arm. "This is about tyranny. They're silencing me." But Ethan was already halfway to his van, muttering something about checking with the authorities for a balanced follow-up. The van's antenna dropped, and they peeled out, leaving Karen fuming under her tent. I thought that might be the end of it, but Karen wasn't done. She grabbed her phone and started live-streaming to her 47 followers on Facebook. "The media has been silenced," she ranted, pacing back and forth. "But I'm not giving up. We'll expose this fraud, even if I have to do it myself." She panned her phone toward my house, zooming in on my porch where Carter and I were standing. I waved sarcastically, which only made her angrier. He's mocking us, she screeched, her voice cracking. But we'll see who's laughing when the truth comes out. At the same time, I noticed Brad creeping out of his house a few doors down, looking like he hadn't slept since yesterday's golf cart getaway. He glanced at Karen's setup, then at my house, and quickly ducked back inside, probably hoping to avoid getting dragged into round two. I couldn't blame him. Karen's energy was chaotic, like a tornado tearing through Maple Grove, and I had a feeling she wasn't going to stop until she hit a wall. Little did she know, that wall was coming sooner than she thought. Carter's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. HQ recommends temporary extraction, he said quietly. The media involvement and visibility are too high. We're activating relocation protocol. I sighed, setting my coffee down. I've been through this before. When you work on sensitive projects, sometimes you have to step back and let the situation cool off. How long? I asked. A few days, maybe a week, Carter replied. We'll set up additional security measures while you're gone. I nodded, already mentally packing a bag. As much as I hated leaving my home, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Karen's face when she realized I'd vanished, poetic justice at its finest. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and the book I still hadn't finished, and followed Carter to the SUV waiting in my driveway. As we pulled out of 42 Pinewood Lane, I caught a glimpse of Karen sprinting out of her community truth zone tent, her phone in hand, filming our departure like she'd just cracked a major conspiracy. They're fleeing, she screamed, her voice echoing down the street. They know the real investigation is coming. I rolled my eyes and turned to Carter, who was driving with the calm precision of a man who'd seen it all. She's never going to stop, is she? I asked. He gave me a slight smirk. Not until she's forced to, sir. While we headed to a safe house about 20 miles away in a quiet part of Huntersville, Carter's team was already moving fast back at my property. They installed a new sign on my fence that read, Federal Surveillance Zone. Entry restricted under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1382. It was subtle but clear, no trespassing, Karen. They also set up a small camera tower, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and a few motion sensors Carter called surprises. I didn't ask for details, I trusted him to handle it. But I couldn't help wondering what Karen would do when she saw the new setup. Would she finally back off? Or would she take it as a personal challenge? The answer came faster than I expected. At 7 a.m. the next morning, while I was sipping coffee at the safe house and scrolling through emails, Carter handed me a tablet with live footage from my property. There was Karen, creeping across the street in a bathrobe, her phone in hand, narrating her mission like she was in a spy movie. This is the forbidden fence, she whispered to her live stream, crouching low as if dodging imaginary snipers. Then she did the unthinkable. She reached over the fence, touched the camera pole, and said, "See? They can't stop us. This is still America." I nearly choked on my coffee. "She's lost it," I said, shaking my head. Carter's expression didn't change, but I could tell he was annoyed. "She just triggered the alarm," he said, tapping his earpiece. "Response team is en route." Back in Maple Grove, the neighborhood was waking up to the sound of a federal response vehicle rolling down Pinewood Lane. Sarah, who'd been jogging with her dog, stopped dead in her tracks, her phone already out to record. Mr. Thompson poked his head out his door, still in his pajamas, muttering, "What now?" Karen was still pacing in her front yard, ranting into her phone about government overreach, when two officers stepped out of the vehicle. They approached her with the kind of calm authority that makes you rethink your life choices. "Ma'am," one of them said, "you're under arrest for trespassing on a federally protected property." Karen's phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the sidewalk, the camera still rolling as they read her rights and escorted her to the vehicle. At the same time, I watched the whole thing unfold on the tablet, my heart racing not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief. This woman had gone from yelling at me in my backyard to getting arrested on a live stream in less than 48 hours. The Maple Grove Facebook group was already exploding with screenshots of the arrest video. Someone had added the cops' theme song, Bad Boys, to the footage, and by noon, it was trending locally with hashtags like hashtag Karen versus the Feds and hashtag Maple Grove Meltdown. I couldn't help but laugh as I scrolled through the comments. She really thought she could take on the Secret Service with a clipboard? And I knew she was trouble when she fined me for my begonias last year. While Karen sat in the back of the response vehicle, her face a mix of shock and fury, Brad emerged from his house just in time to see her being driven away. He rubbed his eyes, still in his cargo shorts from yesterday, and muttered to himself, "This is why I don't join committees." He glanced at my empty driveway, then at the new surveillance sign on my fence, and quickly shuffled back inside, probably hoping to avoid any more drama. But the drama was far from over. Karen's arrest was just the beginning of her downfall, and Maple Grove was about to learn a lot more about their self-appointed HOA queen. Back at the safe house, Carter handed me a plate of toast and eggs, his face as unreadable as ever. "She finally crossed the line," he said, sitting across from me. I nodded, taking a bite of toast. "You called it," I replied. I knew she wouldn't stop until she got herself in real trouble. I glanced at the tablet again, watching the arrest video on loop. Part of me felt a little bad for Karen. She was so caught up in her own delusions that she couldn't see the reality staring her in the face. But then I remembered her accusing my garden gnome of being a surveillance device, and any sympathy I had vanished faster than her HOA credibility. The fallout from Karen's arrest hit Maple Grove like a summer storm, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. By Wednesday afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing with the kind of energy you'd expect at a 4th of July barbecue. Except instead of fireworks, we had Karen's downfall lighting up the local gossip chain. I was still at the safe house in Huntersville, sipping coffee and watching the drama unfold on my tablet, when Carter got a call from HQ. "We've got new intel," he said, his tone shifting to something I hadn't heard before, surprise. "Financial Crimes Unit is heading to Pinewood Lane." I set my coffee down, my eyes widening. "Financial crimes?" "For Karen." Carter nodded, a rare grin breaking through his stoic exterior. "Looks like she's been dipping into the HOA funds for more than just donuts." Back in Maple Grove, a plain white van with a small IRS seal on the door pulled into Karen's driveway at 45 Pinewood Lane. Two plainclothes agents stepped out, one carrying a thick binder, the other a briefcase, and rang her doorbell. Karen, who'd been out on bail since her arrest and under strict orders to stay away from my property, opened the door looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her tracksuit swapped for a wrinkled sweatshirt, her oversized sunglasses nowhere in sight. The agents introduced themselves, and I could see her body tense even through the grainy surveillance footage Carter pulled up on his tablet. One of the agents handed her a document, and Karen's face went pale, not angry, not loud, just pale. She glanced at the paper, then at the agents, and for the first time since this whole saga began, she didn't have a comeback. At the same time, the Maple Grove Facebook group was on fire with speculation. Sarah had posted a photo of the IRS van with the caption, "What's Karen done now?" While Emily commented, "I bet she's been stealing from the HOA. I always wondered how she afforded that hot tub." The truth came out faster than I expected. The IRS agents had uncovered that Karen had been siphoning HOA funds for years, $12,000 to be exact. She'd used the money for personal projects, a fancy landscaping upgrade for her front yard, a second hot tub she claimed was for community hydrotherapy, and even a tax write-off for her emergency defense signage, which included her hand-painted conspiracy signs. The neighborhood board held an emergency meeting that evening, and by sundown, Karen was officially stripped of her HOA title, unanimously voted out, with Brad abstaining because, as he put it, "I don't even know what embezzlement means." I returned to Maple Grove the next day, pulling into my driveway at 42 Pinewood Lane just as the sun was setting. The neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. Kids were biking on the sidewalks again, Mr. Thompson was watering his roses, and Sarah waved at me from her porch with a big smile. Carter and Hayes followed me in the SUV, their presence scaled back now that the Karen storm had passed. But before I could even unpack, the new HOA board, freshly elected after Karen's ousting, threw a surprise event in my backyard. They called it the Maple Grove Peace Barbecue, and it was the most wholesome thing I'd seen in months. Agent Hayes manned the grill, flipping burgers with military precision, while Carter handed out sodas like a bartender at a low-key lounge. Neighbors brought side dishes, Emily's famous potato salad, Mark's homemade lemonade, and for the first time since I'd moved here, I felt like part of the community. Karen, meanwhile, was a ghost. From her house across the street, I saw her peeking through her curtains, her lawn untrimmed, her tint gone. She didn't come outside, didn't yell, didn't even glare. She was out on bail, but the fight had drained out of her. A few days later, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, as two movers loaded her belongings in silence. Karen sat on her steps, a tote bag at her feet, staring at the ground. She didn't look up as the truck pulled away, leaving behind a peeling HOA proud sticker on her mailbox. No one waved. The Parkers, a retired couple who moved into her house a week later, were the opposite of Karen. They brought cookies to every neighbor, joined the community garden, and even hosted a chili cook-off. At their welcome dinner, Mr. Parker raised a glass and said, "We heard about the last tenant. We promise we only enforce bingo rules." The crowd erupted in laughter, and I knew Maple Grove was healing. As a final touch, the neighborhood board unveiled a small stone bench under my oak tree, engraved with the words, "He stayed," and, in tiny letters, "Property owner since 2008. It was a nod to my stand against Karen, and I couldn't help but smile every time I saw it. A few weeks later, at the biggest block party Maple Grove had ever thrown, complete with a DJ, a bounce house, and a taco truck, I walked through the crowd, laughing with neighbors I barely used to talk to. Someone had made t-shirts, Federal Yard Crew, with a cartoon of me holding lemonade and Carter behind me in sunglasses, and another that read Karen-free zone, with a red slash over a shrieking cartoon lady. Carter bought one in every color, and I caught him laughing, actually laughing for the first time since he'd been assigned to me. Maple Grove had changed, and so had I. I'd always been the quiet guy, the one who kept to himself, but now I was part of something bigger, a community that had survived Karen's reign of terror and come out stronger. As the sun set and string lights twinkled across the street, I looked at the Parker's house, now peaceful, and felt a wave of gratitude. I'd never left my yard, not once, not even when Karen called me a squatter, not even when she rallied the HOA against me. Because the truth was simple, this was my home, and no clipboard, no megaphone, no conspiracy could change that. So, what's the wildest neighbor story you've got? Drop it in the comments. And if you laughed, cried, or shook your head at Karen's antics, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next crazy tale from Maple Grove. I've got a feeling this neighborhood has more stories to tell.